Imagine standing on a city wall with dry dust in your throat and fear sitting heavy on your chest. You've heard the stories. Everyone has. Stories of men vanishing into the earth. Stories of cities erased like they never existed. Stories of a conqueror who keeps his promises in ways that twist your stomach with dread. And now, that same conqueror, Tamerlane, is outside your gates. His banners ripple in the wind. His soldiers move like a living sea. And your commander, hands trembling ever so slightly, makes a choice he hopes won't doom you. He surrenders. And for a moment, a very brief, fragile moment, you feel something like relief. Because the conqueror has sent word. He swears on his honor, that not a single drop of your blood will be shed if you lay down your arms. You and your brothers trust the oath, because in this era, a sworn promise meant something. You open the gates. You march out with your weapons lowered, believing you've chosen survival over slaughter. But that belief lasts about as long as it takes to march outside the walls. That's when you see the trenches. Not graves. Not ditches. But enormous rectangular pits carved into the earth with mathematical precision. Even before the truth hits you, your stomach twists. Men around you whisper. Some shift nervously. A few try to pretend they don't understand. And then the soldiers of Tamerlane start yelling commands, pushing you toward the pits without hesitation, without a flicker of shame. Someone behind you mutters, "We surrendered." Another says, "He gave his word." And then it hits you. He did keep his word. Not a drop of blood will be shed. Because you won't bleed if you're buried alive. The panic spreads instantly. Men try to run. Others drop to their knees begging. A few fight with their bare hands. None of it matters. Bloodless death is still death, and Tamerlane's commanders enforce the order with terrifying discipline. You're shoved forward. You stumble. You fall into the darkness of the pit. Bodies crash beside you. Dirt begins falling, first as handfuls, then as shovelfuls, then in horrifying torrents that fill your mouth, your ears, your lungs. You scream, but the earth doesn't care. And somewhere above, seated calmly on his horse, Tamerlane watches. Silent. Emotionless. Satisfied that he has once again turned a promise into a weapon sharper than any sword. This happened. And this was only the beginning. Look, if you're the kind of person who wants the truth behind history's darkest chapters, the stories no one teaches in school, hit like right now. Subscribe to the History Veil, because what you're about to hear will make these first moments feel almost merciful. Share this with someone who loves the past but has no idea how terrifying it really was. Because Sivas, that was Act 1. Before we go deeper into the nightmare, you need to understand who this man truly was. Because he wasn't a foaming barbarian swinging steel blindly. He was worse. Tamerlane was brilliant. Strategic. Patient. A lover of poetry and architecture. A man who could recite verses in multiple languages while planning the extermination of entire populations. A conqueror who blended charm and cruelty like two sides of the same blade. He was born in 1336 in what is now Uzbekistan, a place where ambition and war shaped childhoods long before most children learned their first prayers. A battle injury left him with a limp, earning him the name Timur the Lame, or Tamerlane, but it did nothing to slow the way his mind moved. He claimed descent from Genghis Khan, but where Genghis conquered to rule, Tamerlane conquered to punish. He didn't need cities intact. He didn't need people alive. He needed fear. Fear that traveled faster than his armies. Fear that made cities surrender before the first arrow was even drawn. Fear that made leaders betray their own citizens just to avoid being the next example. And examples. Oh, he made plenty. In just 35 years, his campaigns may have killed 17 million people. Let that number settle into your mind for a moment. That's nearly 5% of the entire world population at the time. Imagine someone today killing 400 million people. That's the scale we're talking about. But Tamerlane didn't just kill. He made art out of atrocity. He designed horrors with a tactician's precision and a poet's flair. And if you think the mass burial at Sivas was terrifying because of the betrayal, wait until you hear what he did to a city that dared to rebel after he had already conquered it. A city so wealthy, so cultured, so proud, that erasing it was like erasing a piece of civilization itself. A city he wanted to make an example of. A city he wanted the world to forget. And Tamerlane was very, very good at making things disappear. Urgench wasn't supposed to fall. That's what everyone believed. It was one of the jewels of Central Asia, a city that shimmered with wealth, culture, trade, and pride. The kind of place kings visited to feel smaller. The kind of place where scholars debated philosophy under marble arches and merchants crossed continents to sell silk, spices, and stories. But all of that vanished the moment they made a single mistake. They rebelled. Most conquerors would have punished the leaders and moved on. That's the usual pattern: execute a few troublemakers, install a puppet governor, rebuild the tax system, then let the city heal. But Tamerlane wasn't like other conquerors. To him, rebellion wasn't just defiance. It was humiliation. An insult. An open challenge. And Tamerlane was a man who never lost at anything, especially not at vengeance. He returned to Urgench in 1388 with an army that moved like a tide of steel and fire. The defenders fought, of course they fought, but it didn't matter. Facing Tamerlane in open battle was like trying to hold back a storm with your bare hands. The walls fell. The gates failed. And then the real atrocity began. Tamerlane didn't come to conquer the city. He came to erase it. Not metaphorically. Literally. Once the defenders were gone, his troops moved through Urgench with clinical precision. They killed everyone: men, women, children, scholars, artists, merchants. There was no ranking system. No differentiation between soldier and civilian. The city's soul was ripped apart house by house, street by street. Chroniclers wrote that the blood ran through the streets like streams after rain. But even that doesn't capture it. People didn't just die, they disappeared. But Tamerlane wasn't satisfied. Death alone wasn't enough. Because a dead city can still be rebuilt. So he ordered the next phase. The crushing. The unmaking. His soldiers tore down every building. Mosques, libraries, markets, palaces, even wells. Walls that had stood for centuries were smashed to powder. Libraries full of ancient manuscripts were set ablaze, the pages curling into ash that drifted like snow. And when the city was nothing but broken stone, the final order came. The one that made his enemies' blood freeze for generations. Plow the ruins. Turn the city into farmland. His soldiers dragged plows across what had once been one of the great cities of the Silk Road. They leveled the rubble. They smashed the recognizable shapes. And then, according to several historical sources, they planted barley over it. Imagine the symbolism of that. Imagine the message. This isn't a ruined city. This isn't a conquered province. This is soil now. Dirt. Nothing. Urgench didn't just fall. It ceased to exist. Boss, think about the psychological impact of this. Imagine hearing about a city so thoroughly destroyed that people couldn't even find its original streets decades later. A city that simply evaporated from the world map. That's the kind of horror that travels faster than armies. The kind that sits in the minds of every ruler, every soldier, every civilian who hears the footsteps of Tamerlane's empire approaching. The message was simple. If you resist, you are undone. Not defeated. Undone. But what if you didn't resist? What if you submitted completely? What if you threw your gates open at the first glimpse of his banners? Well, the Persian city of Isfahan tried exactly that. When Tamerlane's forces approached in 1387, the leaders of Isfahan didn't hesitate. They opened their gates. They surrendered instantly. No siege. No fight. No bloodshed. They laid their weapons at the conqueror's feet, hoping mercy would protect them. And at first, it worked. Tamerlane accepted the surrender. No massacre. No fire. No towers of heads. Not yet. He stationed a garrison. He imposed taxes. He acted like a typical conqueror. Life in the city returned to normal, or as normal as life under an empire of fear could be. Children played in the markets again. Merchants sold fruits and textiles. For a brief moment, Isfahan convinced itself it had outsmarted the monster. But then something small happened. Something minor. Something trivial. The people became angry about taxes. Whispers became frustration. Frustration became mobs. And mobs became murder. In a burst of blind rebellion, the citizens of Isfahan killed the garrison Tamerlane had left behind. It was over in hours. And so was the city. Because if Urgench was an insult, then Isfahan was betrayal. And betrayal was unforgivable. When Tamerlane returned, he did not negotiate. He did not listen. He did not spare. His army swept through the city like a dark wind. He ordered a massacre with a twist so horrifying it still freezes historians where they stand. Each military unit had to return with a specific number of severed heads. A quota. Not captives. Not bodies. Heads. Suddenly, murder became math. Massacre became accounting. Killing became competition. Soldiers raced through the city, dragging people from homes, alleys, and mosques, desperate to meet their required number. Many chroniclers claim 70,000 died. Others said 200,000. Boss, the number doesn't matter. The scale does. Bodies filled the streets. Screams filled the air. Blood filled the gutters. But Tamerlane wasn't done. Not even close. He ordered the heads collected, sorted, and built into towers. Yes, towers. Massive pyramids made from human skulls, placed in public squares, beside gates, beside mosques. As if to say, here is mercy. Here is rebellion. See the difference. These towers stood for years. Some for decades. Long after the survivors had fled. Long after the city tried to rebuild. Imagine walking past a tower of 1,500 skulls on your way to market. Imagine counting them because there are too many to comprehend. Imagine being unable to escape the reminder. You disobeyed. And this is your monument. Delhi. A name that echoed across continents. A city dripping with wealth, art, power, and history. A city that had survived centuries of invasions, dynasties, famines, and wars. A city that wasn't just a capital, it was a symbol. And in 1398, that symbol was about to be shattered in a way the world had never seen. As Tamerlane's army marched through northern India, villages disappeared behind him like footprints swallowed by fire. Fields burned. Towns collapsed. People fled into forests, deserts, anywhere they could hide. And behind all that devastation, one chilling truth lingered. He was just getting started. By the time Tamerlane reached the outskirts of Delhi, he had a new problem. A terrifying problem. A problem that would have made any ordinary general retreat. He was dragging nearly 100,000 prisoners with him. Imagine that. An entire city's worth of captives marching in chains behind the army. Men, women, laborers, scholars, anyone unlucky enough to get caught. Feeding them, guarding them, controlling them, it was impossible. And the Sultan of Delhi was preparing his elite forces, including 120 war elephants armored with steel plates and poisoned blades. A normal conqueror would have panicked. Tamerlane didn't. He looked at the 100,000 prisoners behind him. He looked at the massive battle ahead. And he made a decision so cold it freezes your breath even centuries later. He ordered all 100,000 prisoners executed. In a single day. No rebellion. No resistance. No trial. Just the mathematics of cruelty. His soldiers swept through the camp like shadows armed with blades. The screams must have echoed into the sky. Chroniclers say the ground turned red. Some describe it as a plain turned into a sea. Some couldn't even finish writing about it. And here's the most disturbing part, boss. This massacre wasn't even the main event. It was just preparation. Because Tamerlane was saving his true brutality for Delhi itself. December 17, 1398. The day the earth shook. The Sultan's army stood ready, armored cavalry, elite infantry, and the famous war elephants towering like living fortresses. Blades glinted, tusks dripped poison, drums thundered like the heartbeat of the city itself. People watching from the walls might have believed Delhi would win. Tamerlane smiled. He had prepared something insane. A tactic that shouldn't have worked. A tactic no normal mind would even consider. He gathered dozens of camels. Loaded them with dry hay and grass. And when the elephants charged, he set the camels on fire. Now imagine this. You're a war elephant. You've been trained for years. You've survived battles. You fear nothing. And suddenly a herd of screaming, burning camels, bodies blazing like torches, come running straight at you. The elephants panicked. Not just fear, terror. They turned around and stampeded back into their own army, crushing soldiers, ripping through formations, breaking the Sultan's lines into chaos. Tamerlane didn't just win the battle. He dismantled the entire strategy of Delhi in one flaming stroke. The defenders collapsed. The gates fell. And for Tamerlane, the real work began. Delhi wasn't conquered. It was consumed. For 5 straight days, the city experienced hell. Not rage. Not random destruction. A systematic machine of plunder, murder, and terror. His soldiers didn't run wild. They operated like accountants of death. Every street targeted. Every home broken. Every treasure catalogued. Every person dealt with like part of a list. Historical accounts describe things no human should ever witness. Homes burning with families hiding inside. People dragged into streets. Temples and mosques filled with corpses. The moon disappearing behind smoke so thick it turned day into night. One chronicler wrote, Delhi stank of death so fiercely that even the dogs fled. The survivors, if you could call them that, hid in wells, saws, even graves. But the army found them. They always did. Boss, picture this. A city so vast, so populated, reduced to silence. A capital of 500,000 people turned into a graveyard in less than a week. And even after all that, Tamerlane wasn't finished with the humiliation. He captured 90 war elephants, the pride of the Sultanate. The monsters of battle. The armored tanks of medieval India. What did he do with them? Kill them? Sell them? Use them in war? No. He put them to work. The greatest war machines of India were forced to drag huge stones thousands of miles back to Samarkand to help build a mosque in Tamerlane's name. Delhi's symbols of power were literally used to construct his glory. That's psychological warfare on another level. Delhi never truly recovered. The city took over a whole century, to breathe again. Children born the day Tamerlane marched out would grow old and die before their city healed. But boss, as horrifying as Delhi was, Tamerlane saved his most monstrous masterpiece for last. Baghdad. A city that had been the crown jewel of Islamic civilization. A center of science, art, learning, and poetry. A symbol of centuries of human progress. Baghdad surrendered once. Tamerlane let them live. They rejected him later. Rebelled. That was enough. The siege lasted 40 days. Then the walls broke. And Tamerlane unleashed an idea even worse than Isfahan's quotas. Every soldier in his army, tens of thousands, had to return with 2 severed heads. Not 1. 2. Minimum. Imagine the frenzy. Imagine the madness. Imagine thousands of men racing through Baghdad streets knowing their own lives depended on delivering proof of death. Chroniclers witnessed scenes humanity should never create again. Some soldiers killed prisoners they had captured earlier. Some killed slaves they intended to sell. Some, according to certain sources, even killed their own wives when they couldn't find enough victims. Whether every detail is exaggerated or not doesn't even matter. The atmosphere was real. The terror was real. The towers, oh boss, the towers were real. Dozens upon dozens of skull towers rising across the city. Macabre monuments built from the dead. Placed in public squares. At city gates. Beside mosques and markets. A forest of skulls. A skyline of death. Baghdad reduced to a graveyard of memories. This wasn't conquest. This wasn't war. This was performance. A theater of fear staged by a man who understood terror better than any general in history. And that is why the world still remembers his name. Why cities surrendered at the sight of his banners. Why rulers trembled when his scouts appeared on the horizon. He didn't just conquer. He engineered dread. And centuries later, we're still telling his story. Still haunted by his choices. Still staring into the black mirror he left behind. Because the scariest monsters are the ones who actually lived. Baghdad. Not just a city, a symbol of everything humanity could become at its best. For centuries, it was the shining heart of Islamic civilization. Scholars filled its libraries with knowledge that shaped the world. Astronomers mapped the heavens from its rooftops. Poets recited verses that still echo today. Baghdad was not a city of war, it was a city of brilliance. And that was exactly why its fall hurt the world more than almost anything Tamerlane ever touched. By the time he reached Baghdad in 1401, Tamerlane wasn't just a conqueror, he was a perfected machine of destruction. He'd buried armies alive, erased cities, built towers out of skulls, and turned capitals into smoke. Baghdad should have been safe because it had surrendered once before. Tamerlane had accepted its submission. But submission means nothing when rebellion follows. Baghdad's former ruler seized the moment when Tamerlane marched elsewhere. He took back control of the city and declared independence. He may as well have signed Baghdad's death certificate. The siege lasted 40 days. The kind of 40 days that feel like 40 years. Food ran out. Hope ran out. Even the air seemed to give up. When Tamerlane's men finally broke through Baghdad's defenses, the world held its breath. Would he show mercy again? Would he punish only the leaders? Would he spare the people? No. This time, Tamerlane came to create a spectacle of terror so unforgettable that no city would dare repeat Baghdad's mistake for centuries. The order he gave his army was unlike anything the world had ever seen. Every soldier, tens of thousands of them, had to return with 2 severed heads. Not prisoners. Not captured rebels. Heads. 2. Suddenly, the massacre wasn't just allowed. It was mandatory. Required. Measured. Imagine what that does to a city. Soldiers didn't fight enemies, they hunted them. They raced through Baghdad's streets like men possessed, terrified of failing their quota. The pressure twisted their minds into something inhuman. Families were dragged from homes. People were chased into alleys. Some tried to hide in basements, mosques, saw tunnels. Nothing worked. The chroniclers wrote things that barely seem real. Not because they sound impossible, but because they sound too monstrous. Some soldiers killed valuable prisoners they had captured earlier, just to meet their quota. Some killed people who had tried to surrender. Some, according to several accounts, even killed their own wives out of fear of returning empty-handed. Whether every detail is literal or exaggerated doesn't matter. What matters is the atmosphere, the frenzy, the panic, the total unraveling of humanity inside the city walls. Baghdad wasn't just being conquered. It was being harvested. And once again, Tamerlane had architectural plans for the aftermath. Skull towers. Dozens of them. Some say 60. Some say 80. Some chroniclers claim as many as 120. Whether those numbers are exact or not, one thing is certain. Whole sections of Baghdad were lined with giant pillars built entirely from skulls, an entire skyline remade from the dead. They stood like frozen screams, white bone gleaming under the burning sun. Travelers approaching the gates would see them long before the city came into view. Imagine the impact of that. Imagine arriving from miles away and seeing not domes, not minarets, not palaces, but towers of skulls marking the entrance. Every tower told a story. This city rebelled. This city was warned. This city fell anyway. After the killing stopped, Tamerlane turned to the city's culture. He burned libraries, destroyed palaces, reduced centuries of history to rubble. He turned what had once been the intellectual engine of the Muslim world into an echo of smoke and ashes. Yet, interestingly, he spared the mosques. Not out of kindness. Not out of compassion. But because he knew symbolism. Mosques standing amid ruins was a message. God stays. You don't. Baghdad did not recover quickly. The population collapsed. Trade routes died. The cultural legacy shattered. And its people fled in every direction. Because staying in the shadow of those skull towers meant living inside a nightmare with no end. Boss, this was the fifth city. The final act in the story of a conqueror who didn't just destroy his enemies. He reshaped the psychology of entire civilizations. From the buried soldiers of Sivas, to the erased city of Urgench, to the skull towers of Isfahan, to the apocalyptic sack of Delhi, and now the quota massacre of Baghdad. Every horror had a purpose. Every atrocity was a message. Tamerlane was not simply fighting a war of territory. He was waging a war of memory. He understood something terrifying. Fear outlives victory. Fear travels faster than armies. Fear conquers hearts long before soldiers conquer land. And fear? That was Tamerlane's most loyal soldier. In just a few decades, he carved an empire stretching from Turkey to India, from Russia to the Persian Gulf. But like all empires built on terror, his collapsed quickly after he died in 1405. Cities rebuilt. People returned. Life restarted. Time moved forward. But fear lingers. Even now, more than 6 centuries later, we speak his name with a shiver in our voice. Because Tamerlane proved something horrifying about human nature. The world doesn't remember the conquerors who ruled the longest. It remembers the ones who terrified the deepest. History likes to tell stories in straight lines, rise, fall, but Tamerlane's story doesn't move like that. It spirals. Like a storm tightening with each rotation. Like a shadow pulling everything inward. By the time Baghdad fell, the world had run out of metaphors strong enough to explain him. He was no longer a conqueror. No longer a warlord. He had become something else, a phenomenon, a force of nature in human form. But even storms fade. Even mountains crack. Even nightmares eventually reach their breaking point. And for Tamerlane, that breaking point wasn't an army, or a rebellion, or a kingdom. It was winter. The last campaign of his life began the same way the others had, with ambition that towered over everything. He wanted China. The Ming Empire. The richest, largest, most powerful empire in Asia. A place so vast that only a man with delusions of godhood would dare imagine conquering it. So naturally, Tamerlane convinced himself he could. In early 1405, he set out with an army so large that villages disappeared behind it like candle flames smothered by wind. Tens of thousands of soldiers. Wagons of supplies. Caravans of wealth plundered from half the world. The ground trembled under the weight of his empire as it marched east across the Central Asian plains. But the world had changed. And Tamerlane hadn't. He was old. Nearly 70. A lifetime of battles had carved itself into his bones. His limp had grown worse. His strength wasn't the strength of the man who had leveled cities and drowned armies in darkness. But his ambition? That was untouched. Still burning. Still hungry. And that hunger pushed him into the one enemy he couldn't outthink, outfight, or terrorize. A brutal Central Asian winter. The cold hit the army like a hammer. Winds rolled across the plains like invisible blades. Snow piled against tents until they collapsed. Horses froze where they stood. Men lit fires that died instantly in the storm's breath. Even the strongest soldiers, warriors who had marched through deserts and mountains, felt their bones hollowing with each passing day. But Tamerlane, he refused to turn back. Spread the tents wider, he said. Push forward. God favors the bold. His generals exchanged glances in the darkness. Boldness had brought them this far. But boldness had limits. And those limits were freezing. Men collapsed from exhaustion. Caravans vanished in whiteout blizzards. Supplies rotted in the cold. And the horizon held no warmth, no shelter, no mercy. Still, Tamerlane pressed on. Until one night. A bitter, merciless, cruel night. His body finally failed him. He sat inside a tent warmed by dozens of braziers, fur cloaks piled high around him, steam rising from cups of hot wine at his side. Outside, the storm screamed like a living thing. His commanders waited anxiously for his orders. Then the coughing started. A deep, violent cough that bent him forward, tearing through his chest like the edge of a blade. His hands shook. Fever rolled through him in waves. His breath came in sharp gasps that clouded the air. By morning, the strongest conqueror in the world was too weak to stand. His soldiers gathered outside the tent in total silence. Men who had seen cities erased and civilizations crushed now trembled at the thought of losing the man who had shaped their world. 4 days, he drifted in and out of consciousness. He whispered orders that made no sense. He muttered names of cities long destroyed. Sometimes he reached out as if pulling invisible maps from the air. His body shrank inside the mountain of blankets. His voice thinned. His eyes dimmed. And on February 19, 1405, in the cold heart of a land he planned to conquer, Tamerlane died. There was no final speech. No final triumph. No dramatic last stand. Just the quiet collapse of the most terrifying empire builder the world had seen since Genghis Khan. The army froze without him. The campaign ended instantly. The dream of China evaporated into the winter sky. And the empire he built? It unraveled almost as quickly as it had risen. His sons fought each other for power. His generals formed factions. City after city declared independence. Within a few decades, the vast territory he had carved out through fear dissolved into scattered kingdoms that barely remembered the man who once ruled them. But the world remembered. History remembered. Fear remembered. Because Tamerlane left behind something far stronger than borders. He left warnings carved into the memories of cities. He left ruins where civilizations once stood. He left lessons written in the ashes of people who trusted his mercy. He proved that one man's ambition can devour millions. He proved that terror can win battles faster than swords. He proved that cruelty can echo across centuries. 600 years later, historians still struggle to define him. Monster? Genius? Psychopath? Visionary? Architect of fear? Poet of destruction? Maybe he was all of them. Maybe the truth is that Tamerlane wasn't a man shaped by history. He was a man who reshaped it. With fire, with steel, with fear. And with a darkness that swallowed entire cities whole. And even now, when we whisper his name, something inside us tightens. Because the scariest part of history is not the battles. Not the empires. Not the victories. It's the reminder that men like him really existed. And that sometimes, the world bends for monsters. In the end, Tamerlane's shadow reminds us that history is not just dates and battles, but the terrifying weight of choices made by extraordinary men. Remember this truth, and let the history veil keep revealing what the world tried to forget, so it never fades from human memory again.